So as I mentioned in one of my previous videos where I did my review for the Kyrgyzstan versus Iran match, it basically became a whole rant talking about Amir Ghalenoei and how much I'm upset with him, and I think he is running the national team to the ground. So this is going to be the video where I'm going to discuss why Amir Ghalenoei is failing the Iranian national team. So make sure to strap in because there's going to be a lot we're going to discuss in this video. And by the way, if you're a big fan of Asian football, but more specifically the Iranian national team, this is the channel that you need to be at, so make sure to subscribe. So as we all know, Amir Ghalenoei was hired on as the Iranian national team head coach after the 2022 World Cup, which was considered a little bit of a failure for Iran because they weren't able to finally make it to the knockout rounds of a World Cup. That is always the big hurdle that the Iranian national team has not been able to do. We have now been able to qualify for World Cups quite consistently, but not make it out of the group stage. Amir Ghalenoei was previously the Iranian national team head coach back in, I believe, 2006 and kind of failed in the Asian Cup with us. And that's why he got sacked. So now he got a second opportunity with the national team. Will he learn from his mistakes? That is the real question. I can tell you right now, no, he is not. He was in charge of coaching this team for the Asian Cup and for this upcoming 2026 World Cup. In the Asian Cup, Iran played okay, you could say. We played decently throughout the group stage, then to the round of 16. Then came the big boogeyman himself, the Japanese national team, which was by far one of the best moments that I and probably all of you got to see, where Iran finally beat Japan in a competitive match in the Asian Cup, got their revenge from the 2019 semifinal loss where we got absolutely done-diddled in that game. It was huge. I felt like that was the big moment where Ghalenoei was going to put it together, get this team to kick on, win this Asian Cup, work his magic, start, developing the next generation for the national team going into the 2026 World Cup. But instead, that all didn't happen because we absolutely folded in the match against Qatar in the semifinals. We went from one of the biggest W's ever to one of the biggest L's within a span of a week. It absolutely sucked because we cannot deny it. That Asian Cup was Iran's to lose at that point. Once they beat Japan, it was there for the taking for them. Qatar and then Jordan in the final. Like, come on, you already did the hard work beating Japan. You had two fairly easy matches to win this tournament. The Asian Football Federation were like, Iran, here you go. Here is the kubi de on the plate for you. Just eat it up and make it happen. But we folded. It sucked. It was horrific. I did not enjoy it one bit. But my hope was that Ghalenoei would learn from his mistakes. Let what happened against Qatar happen. Use that as fuel to build and create this next generation. Start, bringing up the youth players. Passing the torch from that golden generation, you can say, to the new generation for the national team going into this 2026 World Cup. He mentioned that in his post-match press conference after the Qatar match that he was going to do it. This generation was done. We need to start bringing in the new, young, hungry youngsters to the national team. And you know what he did? He lied to all of us. One international camp went by. Another international camp went by. Some youngsters were called up here and there, but didn't get any minutes whatsoever. And fans were like, you know what? Maybe he's just waiting for a camp or two just to see which players he wanted to keep, let go. Didn't think they were part of the future for this upcoming World Cup. But then time went on and camps went by, games went by, and Ghalenoei still was not bringing up any of the young players that were making moves to European leagues, that are playing well in those leagues, and instead kept persisting with pretty much the exact same team as the Asian Cup. And you know what the worst part is? You would think with such an experienced group of players that have gone through a couple of World Cup cycles, that have been there and done that, have faced off against these minnows in Asian World Cup qualifying, they would play pretty well. They would be able to handle most of these games. I'm not saying we would win them like 5 or 6-0 every time, but have that 2-0 win, 3-0 win, maybe the odd 5-0 win. I don't know. But we have played like dog shit in almost every single match. Yes, when you look at it at surface level, Iran haven't lost a match. They're top of their group. There shouldn't be any criticism thrown towards Ghalenoei. But as I always like to say, there is context that needs to be discussed. First and foremost, with how qualifying works, Iran would never be in the same group as South Korea and Japan, who are the top dogs in Asia, in my opinion, with Iran being in third. So that's already out the window. You're not even going to play against them, who would be the most challenging opponents if they were in Iran's group. Then when you look at Iran's group, is there really any challenge on the table for them? Yes, I know Iran lost to Qatar in the Asian Cup semifinals. semifinal. But Qatar and Asian Cups are like prime Brazil. And then when they play in Asian World Cup qualifiers, they're just absolute dog water. And then there's Uzbekistan, who I give a lot of praise to. I do think they are the next big upcoming national team in Asia. But the reality is, they're still not one of the top dogs in this confederation. And outside those two teams that you could say are the challenging ones, the rest of the group is an absolute rollover. And in this upcoming 2026 World Cup, it's easier than ever to qualify. You have to just be a top 4 team in the group to qualify for the World Cup. Yes, the top 2 spots are guaranteed qualification, but spots 3 and 4 still put you in contention to qualify. And with how big the groups are and how many more minnow Asian nations there are in it, I would expect nothing less from Iran to not be top of this group. That should be the bare minimum. Iran's group is an absolute cakewalk. If Ghalenoei was losing matches against these nations, then goddamn, he should have already been sacked. But the thing is, we're not winning these games in convincing fashion. The only one game that I could say Iran played really well from start to finish for the most part was the game against Qatar. But one good performance out of 8 other games that have already happened, I'm no mathematologist, but that's not a good percentage. Especially in the most recent games against North Korea and Kyrgyzstan. Those are the 2 worst opponents in Iran's group, and they're barely by the skin of their teeth squeaking by in those games. And you may ask, Sean, why is this Ghalenoei's fault? Why are we barely winning these games? Why do you think we are playing so bad? It stems from a multitude of things. I talked about it a little bit in that review against Kyrgyzstan, but I'm gonna reiterate it here with a lot more clear conscience and not so hot-headed after watching that performance and instantly hopping on and recording a video. I think one stems from the earlier topic I brought up, his players' selections and not really bringing up any of the young generation, the youngsters that need to start being a part of this national team fold going into this upcoming World Cup that's less than 2 years away. There are plenty of really good young players like Hossein-Nejad, Sahar Khizan, to name a few, that are playing as good, if not better, than a lot of players in their same positions that will only get better if they're given the minutes. If you're not going to give them minutes in these games against the likes of North Korea and Kyrgyzstan, then what are the odds that you would play them in World Cup games like the Netherlands? Are they going to play in that match? No, because they've had no experience playing at the senior national team fold and even qualifiers. These games against the lesser opponents in Asian qualifying are the perfect time to do it. I'm not saying play all the U21 team, play all the youngsters in this game, but there needs to be that healthy balance of experienced players with younger players. You can do that. It's not going to make a big enough detriment where you're going to lose the game. The opponents you're playing right now are not going to expose you that badly. And even that being said, we are still being exposed even with a veteran lineup. So how does playing Hossein-Nejad, Hazbavi, Sahar Khizan gonna kill you in these type of games? You're barely beating North Korea and Kyrgyzstan anyway. They are not going to be the reasons why you narrowly win those games. If anything, I can bet you my bottom dollar if you do play those guys, you might actually win the games more convincingly. Not because they're younger, but because it brings in a competitive nature to the national team fold. And you may be asking again, Sean, what do you mean by a competitive nature? Right now with the national team, you could close your eyes and guess what our starting lineups would be, because Ghalenoei plays the same players, makes the same subs, and you already know which players from his selections he's gonna actually play. There's no competition in any of the positions on the national team. They're pretty much all surefire picks, which that leads to those senior players having those shit mentalities, like Azmoun, for example, who knows he'll still be a starter for the national team even if he goes from playing for one of the best teams in Europe and Bayer Leverkusen than going to the UAE at his prime age of 28. Or guys like Saman Ghodus or Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, who I do love Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, but if your coach is selecting these type of players when they're not playing for clubs or basically throwing away their careers, that tells all the other players on the national team that they don't need to have top mentalities, they don't need to be ambitious, they don't need to play at a high level, because the coach is still calling up and starting players that are throwing away their careers or not even signed with clubs at the time of them being called up. They're legit unemployed. Then when you see these youngsters that are hungry and ambitious playing for teams in Europe, scoring goals, playing really well for them, not even get minutes over those type of players, then what are other players gonna do? They're gonna follow suit and they're gonna do the same thing. And that just makes the mentality of the national team, that high standard that Carlos Queiroz was able to to bring and bestow and instill in a lot of these players, it makes it go down. They become stagnant. They start digressing in their careers. They start having these shit mentalities that they can do what they want as long as they're Ghalenoei's favorites. I can be a free agent and I'm still gonna get called up. Let's look at a guy like Alihir Sayedmanesh, one of Iran's top youngsters, who is one of the best players in the Belgian Pro League, and he doesn't even get called up to the national team. What do you think that tells all the other players? I don't need to be playing at the highest level to get called up to the national team. I mean, look at Alihir. He doesn't even get any minutes. He doesn't even get called up. That doesn't make any sense. Don't you want to be playing your best players that are hungrier and that could help build your future for the national team, not players that are only getting older and are only digressing? Ghalenoei literally lied to all of us that he was gonna start implementing the younger players, start building a new generation, because this generation that he is still calling up, that has gone through 2018 World Cup cycle, 2022 World Cup cycle, went through the recent Asian Cup cycle, they're just overcooked at this point. You need to stop having this over-reliance on them. I think some players should still be in the fold, don't get me wrong, but a lot of these players, especially in those defensive positions, some of the attackers just need to be let go of. I did do a video where I talked about the ideal type of lineups and player selections I'd like Iran to play going into this World Cup, where it has that healthy mixture of those younger players that can make a difference, that could help build the future for the national team, but as well has some of those veteran players that are still playing at a high level, not playing in the Middle East and whatnot, but can set those good examples for the other younger players. But the point I'm trying to make here is we are not building for the future of this national team. We're like dinosaurs. We're actually going backwards, if anything. These last couple of World Cup cycles, we really started building something special. We were getting so close to making it to World Cup knockout stages. We were taking Argentina, Portugal, Spain to the sword in World Cup games. Yes, we might have played super defensively, but you can see why Carlos Queiroz was so heavy on us being a more defensive side, because we aren't even keeping clean sheets against Kyrgyzstan and North Korea. We're barely winning those games. Yeah, the games might be boring, but there was a system in place, a style we were playing. I don't even know how we're playing anymore. And this leads to my second and final point in this video. Ghalenoei isn't the type of coach that would take Iran to the next level. Think about it. If the World Cup started today with Ghalenoei as Iran's coach, we would play horrifically in the tournament. Yes, we may score the odd 1 or 2 goals, but it would be like the England game at the previous World Cup on repeat every single time.
No! God, please, no! No!
Ghalenoei is so stubborn with the players that he will always call up and play and start. And the thing is too, there's not really any consistency with it. He has exiled guys like Ramin Rezayan and Ehsan Haj Safi, but then yet still brings up Kanani, Khalilzadeh, these other type of players, but then exiles those certain other players that clearly shows that he has favorites. And then plays guys like Nemati, who has never played for the national team, and he's 28 years old and probably not going to be playing in Europe or really progressing much in his career, instead of playing a guy like Hazbavi, who has a really high ceiling that could do big things for the national team. It could be a future center back leader for the national team. Like, these things just don't make sense. He brings in these random players that are, yes, in their primes, in the midst of their careers, but they've never really had a future with the national team, instead of playing the younger guys that actually could have a future and could be the futures for the national team. Like, this all is just so backwards, and as I said, is like digressing the national team instead of progressing like we were doing these last 4 or 8 years under Carlos Queiroz. Again, I'm not saying bring back Carlos Queiroz. That is done and dusted, but maybe like a coach like Hervé Renard, who is stubborn but has the pedigree to back it up. I'm not saying we're gonna be able to bring in Pep Guardiola, but a guy that has pedigree, that can help build a future in a new system, a new ethos, on top of the foundation that Carlos Queiroz built for this national team. Because I don't think we are the national team like we once were. I don't think we would fight tooth and nail against the likes of Spain and Portugal in World Cups. I think we would get absolutely mollywopped now in those games. And if that's how I and many of you are feeling, that means we are digressing because of all these things I mentioned. Ghalenoei is stubborn, but not in the right ways. The player selections are poor. The standard that he has brought to the national team is poor. I have never seen so many of our top players digress in their careers, but go unpunished for those decisions to go backwards in their careers. I know a lot of you might love Sardar Azmoun and still think he should be in the national national team fold. Like, I think he should be in the national team fold, but there has to be some sort of repercussion for a guy like him to make that type of move. He should no longer be a main guy for that World Cup going into 2026. Even in his prime, when he was a golden boot winner in the Russian league or playing in Europe for Bayer Leverkusen, he wasn't able to score in World Cups for us. Why do you think now this Shabab Al-Ali version of Sardar Azmoun is gonna go in and score a hat trick against Brazil in World Cups? It's just not gonna happen. He can score as many goals as he wants in the UAE. We know Azmoun is a great player, but we know he could be playing at a higher level. He can really be setting that example for other Iranians. That's what we want to see from these type of players, but not for them to have a poor mentality and go to the UAE. And Ghalenoei is allowing these things to happen. He does not build a standard for these players. He just wants to play favorites. He wants to play who he wants to play just to get wins and to keep stat padding his stats as the national team head coach. But me and many of you as fans just see right through that. Even the media is getting on his back. Many people are outspoken about this now. We're not going to be able to compete at World Cups if this is the standard and the coach you want to bring in for it. So yes, I do think Amir Ghalenoei is failing the Iranian national team. Yes, on surface level, he has a great record. He's only lost one game, and that was against Qatar in the Asian Cup semifinals. But if you watch game after game, you see the players that he calls up. You see that he's not building a future for this national team going into this World Cup. We're gonna be a laughing stock at the World Cup. You just gotta cut your losses and just try to bring in someone else, like a Carlos Queiroz type of coach. Not saying like a defensive-minded coach, but a coach that has pedigree that can build a new foundation on top of the old one, so we can see Iran progress and make it to a knockout round, because this is going to be an easier World Cup, more so now than ever, to make that happen. And I don't want to hear none of these excuses in the comments, but Shayan, we're top of our group, we've only lost one game. We could put out 11 of me on the field with the group Iran is in for qualifying, and we would still be in a top 4 position. Qualifying is easier than ever. This is the lamest excuse ever. The teams we are playing are not that good. You all know the Iranian national team is at a standard where we should be winning these games. We should be atop of these groups, but not in the way that we are playing right now, and not with the trajectory this national team is going right now. We have a handful of such good young players, Hossein Nejat, Sahar Khizan, Hazbavi, that if we play them in these type of games, might be a good way to showcase them on these bigger stages to maybe get bigger moves in Europe, or for like a guy like Hazbavi to make a move in Europe. But if we're not going to play them here, then how are we going to play them in big World Cup games when they haven't built their way up in qualifying to play in World Cups, to showcase our top young talent that we have, that Iran can produce, that are brilliant, that are on par with some of the best youngsters in the world, but don't get the same opportunities as them? Why don't we help try to build those opportunities, showcase them, so we can have great players like the Ali Dais, the Ali Karimis, the Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, the Mehdi Taramis around the world? We can't keep relying on these guys to the end of dawn. Like, at some point it's gotta end. You gotta pass the torch on. And Ghalenoei is not helping that right now. We're gonna let a coach who lied to everybody that he was gonna do all these things lead us to the 2026 World Cup and watch us get embarrassed. I don't want to see that. And I'm almost certain many of you don't want to see that. But boys and girls, my opinion only matters so much. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Do you guys agree or disagree with my points? You gotta let me know. Make sure to smash the like button on today's video, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and I hope you'll have a lovely day.